3 months ago, Hayden Panettiere exposed evil Hollywood, sharing with all of us her story of abuse and torture that she had to deal with. 3 months later, she died, and everyone's wondering why. This is the first video of a 3-part series where we're going to be breaking down this interview and discussing exactly what went on throughout her life. Today we're focusing on completely losing her childhood, her blurred financial roles within the family, and then the exploitation that she had to deal with throughout her life. Thank you for subscribing. Let's dive in.
What's a childhood memory that you have that you feel defines who you are today?
Got a laundry list I can think of off the top of my head, but really defines who I am. I think I've been really impacted by the people that I've gotten to work with, and especially when I was at very sensitive ages. Like when I think back to Remember the Titans, as you said, at 10 years old, that experience, that whole experience, everyone on set, and playing that character of Cheryl that felt so similar to who I was naturally as a person. I felt like that really shaped me, really shaped my perspective of the industry, made me feel like now I know what kind of actor I want to be. I want to be generous and I want to be there for people, but this can also be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to read from your book, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
Now notice, there was a book in the background. She did just publish her memoir talking about her life's experience inside of Hollywood, which clearly exposed many different people, or maybe not people individually, but things that go on inside of Hollywood. And it's actually nice to hear that on Remember the Titans, when she was 10 years old, she had a good experience. And it's not abnormal to believe that as a young 10-year-old girl, she developed and was shaped into the person that she is today based off of the experiences that she had in her life. I mean, all children do. Hers just happened to be on the set of a movie instead of in the classroom.
You say in the book that from a very young age, I lost the chance to have a normal childhood, friends, relationships, and my privacy, because instead of fighting it, I leaned into the talent I was somehow blessed with. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think a normal childhood looked like? And how was yours different from that?
Well, to me, a normal childhood looked like extracurricular activities. It looked like going to school, being in school all day long, having a social life and connection with your peers, going home, doing homework, having play dates, having friends over, having those kind of experiences. And even though I did get some of that because I had to live that life and had to be removed from it all the time, whether it was to go to auditions or to go to work, I constantly was missing out on the social aspect of what was going on with I was trying to be friends with them, but when you miss out, and then you sit down, you really have nothing to talk about because I only had my experience and what I did yesterday, which was I was on set or I was in the city doing an audition, and that wasn't something that I could expect anyone around me to understand.
So she was having trouble building relationships and bonds and friendships with other people her age because they just couldn't relate to what her life was all about. They're in school and hanging out with each other, maybe playing sports together, and she's on set with Denzel Washington in Remember the Titans and, experiencing something that they just can't relate to.
So I feel like I got a taste of what a normal childhood would be. And I was on swim team and I did do gymnastics and, occasionally I got invited to a birthday party, but a lot of the times I was left out. So it didn't feel like I had a normal childhood, normal upbringing. But to me, it was, just being able to be a kid.
Yeah. Did you recognize that then?
I did. I remember school was very tricky for me because here I was trying to fit into two different worlds, and I was dealing with this massive world, which is the industry, and dealing with big emotions like what you feel after rejection or not getting a role, or a ridiculous amount of praise, an unhealthy amount of praise that you get at too young of an age. And then I had the world that I was desperately trying to fit into as well, that I was supposed to fit into, that it should have been easy to fit into, and I couldn't fit into that either. So I was like, where do I belong?
Yeah, it's hard when you're caught in between two different worlds and you somehow, as a very young child, have to somehow make it look seamless and move through these worlds with taking emotions from this one into that and that one into this. And
and you don't want anyone to see you sweat.
Yes.
Either. You want to make it, you want to be cool, calm, and collected, because being overly emotional around your people that age, like my age, it doesn't go over well. And it doesn't go over well with adults either. So you have to like bottle up all of these emotions.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it almost feels like when you're with your kids your age, you're just trying to fit in and be cool, but you're dealing with these emotions you're carrying over. And then when you're with the adults, you're trying to make sure everyone's happy and everything's going okay. And
yeah, I feel like the first time I really felt like I didn't fit in, though, was actually when I was in kindergarten, and it was brought on by the teacher not liking me. The opinions of the teachers and the way that the adults saw me was rubbing off on the kids. And I can only imagine what the kids' parents were saying about, their children going to school with an actress at home. But yeah, I was bullied first by a teacher in kindergarten, and then it graduated to first grade was the first time I heard anyone say, raise their hand and say, why does Hayden get to miss school and we don't? And that was the first time I felt like, oh, it bothers them that what I do. And then middle school, which is treacherous as for anybody, but especially as a female, like girls are just really hard on each other. And it wouldn't help when the teacher would roll in a screen and say, hey, we're going to watch a movie during class, and everyone would get excited, and then they'd pop in Remember the Titans. And there I was trying to fit in and just trying to find a seat next to somebody who wasn't rolling their eyes or huffing and puffing about having to sit next to me. I was just trying to blend, and then they were popping that on, and I was just like, is this even legal? Like, can you do this to a kid who's a child abuse?
Yeah.
It's actually commendable that she was going to traditional school. I would think that most young actors and actresses, 10, 11, 12 years old, they don't go to normal school. They get homeschooled, and then they would be going on the set. So her trying, she was making the efforts here to be a normal kid in gymnastics and swim, trying to go to normal school. But as you can see, it's difficult to do. People don't look at you like a normal other student, especially when they're young, middle school ages. I used to be a teacher myself. It's just a brutal time in school with bullying, harassment, and just how you're judged by your peers. And it's crazy because I have a video coming out on Macaulay Culkin in just a few days, and he deals with a lot of the similar things that she was dealing with here, and that's because they both started at such a young age.
Was it ever clear what the reason the teacher who bullied you was, or did they ever have any interactions with your family? Or
no, first of all, kindergarten is way too young to really do anything wrong. I remember the first time she ever bullied me was the very first day of kindergarten, and we were coloring, and they had the crayons in these wet wipe boxes, and they said, wrap it up, everybody close the boxes, and as being kids, it became a little bit of a race of who's going to close it first. And I went to close one, and another girl went to close it at the same time, and it went on her finger. And I apologized profusely and felt horrible about it. And I remember her best friend walked up and said, yeah, but we have to tell on you. And my heart sank, and I didn't know how it was going to go. And they walked up to the teacher and told her, and I looked at her and I said, it was an accident. And she looked right at me and she said, oh, it doesn't look like an accident to me.
Wow.
And at such a young age, for that to that's stuck with me, all of these years later.
Imagine being that teacher today, whoever that teacher is that's going unnamed, and something that is not done here is names being called out. She does a nice job of keeping everything bottled up so that no one's actual names are mentioned. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. But yeah, our children are influenced at a very young age.
Not all of my teachers were like that. There were teachers that were super supportive, but there was a substitute teacher who came in and she would call me the big cheese in front of everyone. And she said, "What you think because you're an actress, you're the big cheese," and that's so not who I was, and so not who I wanted to be. So quite the experience trying to fit in. Disappointed in people. I really just wanted to, as you said, fit in. I wanted to be normal.
Like every kid does.
Like every kid.
Yeah, like all of us do. And as someone, by the way you described it, I had a very normal childhood, and it's hard enough as it is, even when it's, normal. And so when something's making you stand out or someone's pointing things out, especially as kids when we don't have a clue what's going on, and all the other kids in your class who wouldn't really understand how to make context of this, you need an adult to kind of make sense of it.
Yeah, and a lot of it I felt like it came out of left field. I one of the things I'm sure you read in the book is that I kept the notes that were passed to me in school, the nasty notes, and I kept them in my binder and I kept them under my bed. And I think it was because I wanted to desperately to understand what they were seeing in me, and it started the habit of changing who I was to make others happy, to make them like me. And I thought if I could understand where they were coming from or what they saw or what they didn't like, that I could, maybe it was the actress in me and having been directed all my life, that I could change my performance a little bit and it would make them accept me.
So just from her beginning as a child in kindergarten, she was dealing with things that were mentally changing her, teachers that were treating her poorly, notes that were being passed around about people not liking her. She was already being developed to be self-conscious and probably not feel so great about herself, questioning how life is actually supposed to work, being an actress and going to school, being a student, and a peer with all of these other kids.
You've talked about having the pressure to support and provide for your family as well, right? Did you always know that that was your responsibility even then? Like when you're talking about this idea of performing, making sure everyone else is okay, right. I wonder how much of it was something you had to do at home as well.
I want to make it clear that, my father was a lieutenant in the fire department and he had businesses, so I wasn't supporting the family, but I do remember being very young and my mom trying to explain to me that this corporation she set up paid for the cars, the lease on the cars and the cell phone bills because it was a tax write-off.
Right.
And I remember that role reversal being incredibly uncomfortable for me, where I was, on one hand, I was still a kid and I was listening to my parents and had to do everything that they told me I could and could not do. But at the same time, I was working hard, making money, and this money was going towards things that I wasn't privy to. So as my dad would kick my butt if I made people think that I supported the whole family. But then when I got older too, and my mom bought an apartment for me when I was 16 and my whole family lived in it. So again, it was just that very strange, uncomfortable feeling of the role reversal and desperately wanting to still feel like the kid and still feel like I had parents to lean on. Even when I was a kid, I was scared of the dark, and I would make my dad lay down next to me, and if his head ever went below mine, I would freak out and make him sit up further so I could, because I wanted to feel like the kid. That has kind of continued on in my life, just wanting to know that if I found myself in a terrible position, that I could call somebody to to help me. I could rely on somebody. I wasn't the only person. I wasn't the person that everybody else was relying on, and therefore nobody was there for me.
Hayden definitely seems like she's taken a lot of time to kind of digest what happened throughout her life, probably a lot of therapy as well, because she seems to have a good understanding as to how she was feeling, but not only how, why she was feeling that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, and so natural, right? To want that and to seek that is so real and so natural, especially as a young child and kid. And then, of course, with everything else that you're taking on, there's nothing about that feels anything but what every child deserves and what every child wants and, deeply is looking for. But I know in the book you also write about how there's this sense of what you were just saying about collecting all these notes and not wanting to almost let the kids down and become who they need you to be. It feels like that kind of became your relationship with your mom as well, where you didn't want to disappoint her.
Oh my gosh, that was my entire relationship with her. She was my boss. That's how I saw her. Even though she was the most supportive person when I, did what I was supposed to do and did it well and was the one cheering me on, it did feel like that was what I had to do to get her love. And that was, a tough pill to swallow. Everything was business. Everything was business focused. And I started at 8 months old. I can't even remember a time where she wasn't a momager, where everything didn't revolve around business. And there were periods of time as I got older where we spent a lot of time traveling and on the road together, and I was the only person there, so I became the confidant and the assistant and the therapist and the shoulder to cry on and everything but her child.
Momager. That's a term I've never heard before. But as I mentioned just a few moments ago, the video I have coming out of Macaulay Culkin, he speaks very similar about his father, how his father only cared about the money that he was bringing in and about managing him as talent instead of being a father. It's nice to hear here that Hayden at least had a better relationship with her mother on top of the manager position that her mother held over her. But still, it's a lot for a child to handle, to know that you have to perform well at your job to earn that praise and that love from your parent.
Have you ever had the opportunity to tell her that and to have that conversation with her?
When I was 19, I finally got the guts got up the courage to split from her business-wise, because I desperately wanted a relationship with her, desperately wanted her to just be my mom. And so she came into my trailer during lunch when we were filming Heroes, and I said to her, I don't want us to work together anymore. I just want you to be my mom. And I remember being hopeful, but there was that part of me who knew her too well. But I also wasn't expecting the reaction that I got, which was, "You owe me." And that's all she said. And she walked out. And part of me was like, oh, I'm relieved that it was short, like ripped the Band-Aid off. But then it was like this dark looming cloud, over my head going, what does she mean by I owe her? What form of payment is she expecting? And it was disappointing to find out that it was money and that she didn't pursue a relationship with me as just a mother-daughter. Wow. Like once the business aspect was removed, I was hoping that if I remove this, then there will be no reason for her to be anything other than my mom. And the fact that it seemed like she didn't care to have a relationship with me was a tough pill to swallow.
As a child, I'm sure you were also, even as a teenager, you're still dealing with the guilt of like, how do I have this conversation with my mom?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm guessing there was a part of you that was, of course, grateful. And of course,
yes.
like, but at the same time, I hear your intention loud and clear, which is, I just want you to be my mom.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to play another role in my life. And then to not get that other role even when that part's taken care of. Yeah. Do you still not connect or talk today?
At the moment, no, there is not a relationship between her and I, sadly. I've gone through periods of time where we haven't spoken at all. It seemed to me it was kind of like there was no reason. She had no reason to call, and the only reason why she would reach out was when something was needed. It wasn't just to say, hi, or how are you, or let's grab a bite, or anything like that. It's been a really tough road, and no matter how many times that door has been slammed in my face, I've desperately seeked her approval for my entire life. She was the person after every take that I looked to. I wouldn't look to the director or the producers or anybody else. The only person that existed and the only person whose opinion mattered to me was hers. So after every take, no matter what I was doing, I would find her. And I'm sure I made the directors feel like, hey, because I would run right past them straight to Mom, and I had to make sure that that she was happy with it and I wasn't in trouble, because if I didn't do it right, I was in trouble. Yeah. It was not a good reaction. But I mean, I've lived to please her, and even though, as you said, I'm incredibly grateful. Here she and I've never had a conversation with her as to why she stopped acting and decided to focus her entire life on creating a career for me, and whether it was just that she felt like I was good at it, which is why she kept me in it, or she wanted to live vicariously, or if she wanted to create a potentially successful future for me. I haven't gotten a chance to really talk with her about that. But I'm very grateful for everything that I have. But it was just very confusing because I never asked for it.
Another instance of a parent trying to relive their past, her mother being an actress as well, through their child. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I love that she was able to teach her daughter this trade that she had some natural abilities for, to be super successful as an actress, and to fuel that and to help her through that. But it gets to a point where the parent takes it too seriously, where they're the momager, and the relationship between mother-daughter or father-son or whatever it is gets destroyed because of business. Business becomes more important than the loving relationship.
And that was the thing. Like, there were times where things would get overwhelming, and I could tell they would get overwhelming for her. And she's a big personality. And I also felt very guilty about us having to spend so much time away from my father, and her having to spend so much time away from her son, my little brother, who was growing up, and that it was because of me. It was because of what I was doing. And it was my fault. And I remember her actually turning to me one night and saying, "You're the reason why I'm missing my son growing up." And, that was a punch in the gut. But as grateful as I was, I wanted to say to her, "But I didn't ask you to take me on auditions. I didn't. I wasn't even old enough to, perceive, to understand anything but good, bad, hot, cold, diaper change, food, that kind of stuff." So there were really high emotions. I loved what I did and I had great experiences, but at the same time I was like, I didn't beg you to give me your life, to sacrifice all of this so that I could have this career.
So her early days in school with her classmates and teachers were really not very good. She was always trying to find her place and actually being hated by many. And then her relationship with her mother was more of a manager role than a loving parent role. Although I'm sure there was some loving parent stuff as well, it seemed to fade away as time went on, and that relationship was just really focused on the career, the success. So even before any abuse started happening for Hayden, she had a very tough upbringing just being an actress in this space trying to be a normal person. But now is when some of this abuse begins as we dive into the terrible things that began happening to her.
And this, when I got to this part, when you write about this in the book, you write about a moment in your career where a friend of yours takes you onto a boat. You're led to a room which has an older man in it, and then basically told to perform acts and,
Oh, yeah.
And when I read that, I'm like, oh gosh, like not only have you felt like you've had a really unsupported, upbringing, you're now with a friend in the industry and then ending up in a situation like this. Could you talk to me about what that moment does to your psyche when you're that?
I mean, the fact that I was 18, even though I'd lived such a huge life and I thought I was so mature at 18, scientifically, her frontal lobes don't develop until we're, 26, 25, 26. So even though I felt like I could make healthy decisions, safe decisions, I wasn't capable of being fully aware of what was going on around me. And it wasn't until I found myself in predicaments that I realized, like, my perspective completely shifted, and I realized that I was in danger. But by the time I'd realized I was in danger, I was quite literally out to sea. And it was that moment shook me and was shocking. And I was quite literally walked down, and I had been having a great time. There was no hints of anything like that happening. So it took me, I was shocked. It took me by surprise. And it was led by somebody that I had grown to trust and see as a protector and somebody who had my back. And to be walked down, down the stairs, and it was as like a surprise, presented as though it was like a surprise, and it was this very small room, and she physically put me in the bed next to this undressed man who was very famous and had his hands like this, like this was just, an average day for him. And this is something that happens all the time.
Something that I noticed here, and I said it earlier in the video, how she didn't name her teacher. She's not naming the woman who brought her to the room, nor is she naming the man that was in the bed. She's calling out what's happening in Hollywood and what her experiences were, but she's not actually naming the people. And I'm wondering if that's out of fear. Is she scared to name these people because it would be next level exposure?
And I waited for her to leave, and I mean that lion in me, that fire in me, that my hair stood on end, and I became ferocious. I was like, this is not happening. But I had nowhere to hide, and I bolted, and I hid wherever I could think of to hide on a boat. There was no jumping off and swimming away, and there was nobody who was going to. I realized that there was nobody who was going to be empathetic to my situation, that this was nothing new to them.
And that said as well, that she couldn't feel as if she could confide in someone or get help from anyone on that ship, because this was the norm. This is what happens on that ship. And even bigger, this is what happens in Hollywood. And she realized that at that moment.
I mean, it's such a horrifying event to go through. and to be put in that position at 18 years old.
And disappointing when somebody lets you down like that. And I'd been let down so much before, and that when you really find somebody that you trust, like, you hold on to them for dear life, and you feel so lucky. So to be betrayed like that is just an awful feeling.
So that's the start of Hayden's life, all the way up to when the abuse began. There's much more to this story, which I'll be covering in my next video. If you want to watch the original interview, I've linked it down below. And if you want to learn more about Hayden's recent death, you can check out my original video right here, and I'll see you guys over there.